Galileo Galilei, 1564 to 1642, an Italian astronomer, engineer, and physicist, often credited with founding modern science due to his pioneering use of experiments to validate physical theories. His significant contributions include the improvements of the telescope, through which he made many monumental astronomical discoveries. For example, the 4 largest moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and of course the detailed observations of sunspots and the rugged lunar surface. Galileo's advocacy of the Copernican theory, which posits that the Earth and planets revolve around the Sun, brought him into an unwanted conflict with the Roman Catholic Church. Thus, in 1633, he was tried by the Inquisition and found vehemently suspect of heresy. This led to his house arrest, where he remained until his death. But despite these challenges, his work laid the foundation for modern physics and astronomy. He's often referred to as the father of modern physics and even the father of science. And if you want to learn all about him, you've certainly arrived in the correct place to do so. Welcome to the channel. If you are new here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it's great to see you again. As always, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, links to the Patreon are in the description. Otherwise, if you want YouTube to push the video out to more people and share this glorious channel with others, a like, comment, and subscribe certainly pushes them in the correct direction. Now, with all that out of the way, I'd like you to get yourself comfortable as we go through the life of Galileo Galilei. Do keep in mind that while this is purely a biographical text, we are going to be interspersing it with a lot of different tidbits about his scientific experiments and discoveries and some inventions. So if it goes off course a little bit, please do remember that it will gradually drift back on track. Now, let us begin. Galileo Galilei's early life in Pisa and subsequent move to Florence set the stage for his future contributions to science and his questioning of the established authority. And that's where we're going to begin, from his education, which began under the care of Muzio Tedaldi and continued in Florence under Jacopo Borghini, emphasizing logic, a foundation that would significantly influence his methodological approach to scientific inquiry. Educated at the prestigious Vallombrosa Abbey, he was exposed to a rigorous curriculum that prepared him for his latter studies at the University of Pisa, where he would famously challenge Aristotelian physics, something deeply entrenched in the scientific mind at the time. Of course, his family had played a crucial role in shaping his character and career up to this point. His father, Vincenzo Galilei, was a musician and a critical thinker about music theory. From a young age, he instilled in Galileo a sense of skepticism toward established norms. This critical approach to knowledge would later manifest in Galileo's revolutionary scientific ideas, which, of course, we will get to later. Moreover, Galileo's relationship with his younger brother, Michelangelo, who was constant of financially burdening him, highlighted the practical aspects of Galileo's pursuits, seeking inventions that could provide a stable income. Now, Galileo's early life thus intertwined a rich cultural upbringing with the practicalities of financial responsibilities, nurturing both his intellectual curiosity but also his need for practical applications of his knowledge. If you're good at something, don't do it for free. Galileo knew this much. These dual influences are evident in his later work, where he not only developed theories that challenged the very foundations of contemporary scientific understanding, but also invented devices that had significant practical use, such as his improvements to the telescope. His formative years were thus a prelude to a life of intellectual rebellion and innovation, deeply influenced by the blend of musical creativity and logical rigor that he was exposed to from such an early age. Thus his personal life and family background are as fascinating as his scientific achievements. His choice to refer to himself simply as Galileo underscores a distinctive aspect of Italian cultural norms regarding names at the time. You see, the connection of his name to his notable ancestor, Galileo Bonaetui, and the biblical significance of Galilei link him to both a rich family history and a deeper cultural and religious heritage. This connection was famously highlighted in the sermon by Tommaso Cacciuni during the Galileo affair, using the biblical text to critique Galileo's astronomical pursuits in a pun that played on his name and activities, looking up to the heavens through the telescope. Galileo's membership in the Accademia dei Lincei was another point of pride and identifier that he sometimes used, reflecting his commitment to advancing science within an elite group that supported and encouraged his resources, along with sharing his intellectual curiosity. But what about Galileo in private? Well, of course, a private life is thusly so, private. But what we do know paints a picture of a man who, despite his religious faith and contributions to science, faced many personal and societal changes. His relationship with Marina Gamba and their 3 children were a major part of his life. The fate of his daughters, Virginia and Livia, entered a covenant due to their illegitimate birth, reflects a harsh reality of societal norms at the time concerning marriage and dowries. His son, however, Vincenzo, was later legitimized and integrated into Galileo's scholarly legacy, suggesting a reconciliation of his personal duties and his scientific career. Galileo's journey through academia and his eventual pivot from medicine to mathematics and natural philosophy was not just a personal choice for him, but a significant turn in the history of science itself. Who knows what would have happened if he had just continued on the original course? Initially enrolling at the University of Pisa for a medical degree, Galileo's curiosity and intrinsic interest in the natural world quickly redirected his path towards scientists, influenced by encounters with the ideas of thinkers such as Girolamo Borro and Francesco Buonamici. The incident with the swinging chandelier around 1581 illustrates Galileo's early engagements with empirical observation, a hallmark of his scientific method. This insight into the pendulum swings, a discovery that paved the way for more accurate timekeeping, reflects his knack for connecting practical observations with theoretical implications. You know that thing inside the big grandfather clocks, swinging back and forth, keeping the time? Well, you can thank Galileo for that original theory. His accidental exposure to a geometry lecture sparked a lifelong passion for mathematics, which not only changed his career trajectory, but also his father's plans for him. Well, later on, Galileo's invention of the thermoscope and his design of hydrostatic balance show early prowess in both experimental and applied sciences, bringing him recognition among scholarly circles. His appointment as an instructor at the Accademia dell'Arte del Disegno in Florence marked another significant phase in his life, where he had the opportunity to mingle with the artistic elite and infused his scientific pursuits with an aesthetic sensitivity learned from Renaissance art. His lectures on Dante's Inferno, a work by the renowned Dante Alighieri, reflect an interdisciplinary approach that combined his technical knowledge with cultural and literary analysis. By the year 1589, Galileo secured a more formal academic position as the chair of mathematics at the University of Pisa. His responsibilities expanded significantly after the death of his father in 1591, taking on the care of his younger brother Michelangelo. His move in 1592 to the University of Padua was another turning point. It was there where he expanded his research into mechanics and astronomy, laying the groundwork for future astronomical discoveries that would revolutionize our understanding of the cosmos. His subsequent engagement with astrology, not astronomy, astrology, a common scholarly pursuit at the time, tied his studies in mathematics and astronomy together quite nicely, and it highlights the period's integrated approach to science and the humanities. Now, on to his astronomical observations with his telescopes, which marked another pivotal point in the history of science, seeing things that people had never seen before, and challenging established views, adding key data to the debate about the structure of the universe. His observation of the supernova of 1604 and the novae of 1572 and 1601 were significant because they challenged the Aristotelian belief in the unchangeability and perfection of the heavens. The lack of detectable diurnal parallax in these new stars indicated that they were distant objects, and that contradicts the Aristotelian model that stars were fixed to a celestial sphere, and that all change was simply limited to the sub-lunar world. The development of the telescope, although not originally invented by Galileo, was significantly advanced and improved upon by him. By 1609, he had developed a telescope with about 30 times magnification, and this was huge for the time. His demonstrations of this technology to Venetian lawmakers not only provided him with a valuable source of income, as they were very excited to support this research, but it also enabled his pioneering astronomical observations. Thus his publication, Sidereus Nuncius, Starry Messenger, which detailed his telescopic observations of the moon, Jupiter's moons, and countless stars, came out and had profound implications on astronomy and physics. And also, as a side note, and just my personal opinion, what a beautiful name for a book, Starry Messenger, Siderius Nuncius. Now, his discovery of the moons orbiting Jupiter in particular provided a robust challenge to the geocentric model of the universe, which suggested that all celestial bodies revolved around the Earth. He was very happy to make this discovery. What could possibly go wrong when he began explaining it to others? Well, the observation of Jupiter's moons, namely Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, offered tangible evidence of a center of motion that was not centered on the Earth. This discovery was crucial in the gradual acceptance of the heliocentric model of the solar system, which was proposed by Copernicus. However, as you probably know, the revolutionary nature of his findings met with skepticism and outright resistance from the establishment, and not just scientific but also ecclesiastical. Well, the scientific part of it was partly due to the limitations of early telescopic technology, which made it difficult for others to confirm his observations. Of course, not everybody had the significantly advanced equipment that Galileo had. Well, Galileo's efforts to use the regular movements of Jupiter's moons to solve the longitude problem in navigation once more showed his penchant for applying scientific discoveries to the world's practical problems. Although the practical application to navigation at sea was limited due to the difficulty of making precise astronomical observations while on a moving ship, certainly tends to make things a little bit hard for the measurements. The method did, however, prove valuable for land-based applications, and was a precursor to more accurate timekeeping solutions that would eventually solve the longitude problem. Galileo's telescopic observations of Venus and its phases were very crucial in challenging this geocentric model of the universe. This model had, after all, been so deeply entrenched that people were not willing to let it go. In fact, it had been there since antiquity, and it was much like the concepts of Galenic medicine and the old ways of this sort of thing when people were moving out into more modern medicinal theories. It's hard to change old habits. Well, the Ptolemaic model, which placed Earth smack bang at the center of the universe, could not accommodate the full range of phases of Venus that Galileo had observed. These observations supported the heliocentric model proposed by Copernicus, where both Earth and Venus orbit the Sun, allowing Venus to exhibit a full cycle of phases, quite similar to those of the Moon as viewed from Earth. This was a significant piece of evidence that helped shift the consensus from a geocentric to a heliocentric understanding of the universe. And the more time went on, the more people were convinced. Unfortunately, it's difficult to convince the people who are going to put you on trial for being a heretic, but, well, we'll get to that soon. Galileo's observations of Saturn and its rings further exemplifies his pioneering contributions to astronomy, although It also highlights the unfortunate limitations of early telescopic technology. Initially mistaking the rings for separate bodies due to their appearance, or as ears, as he called them, appendages on either side of Saturn, Galileo was puzzled when these features seemed to disappear in later observations. This was due, of course, to the rings being edge-on to Earth, making them virtually invisible with his telescope's resolution. His continued observations and the changes in appearance he noted laid the groundwork for future astronomers to better understand the complex ring system of Saturn. But for Galileo's time, it seemed to be a bit of a bridge too far, even for a genius such as himself. The sighting of Neptune in 1612 as a fixed star, not recognized as a planet, illustrates the nascent stage of telescopic astronomy, where even significant discoveries such as a new planet could go completely unrecognized. Galileo's recording of Neptune's position and motion, though he did not identify it as a planet, was part of the extensive celestial cataloging work that would be essential for the future celestial mechanics. Galileo's studies on sunspots were also revolutionary. They not only challenged the Aristotelian view of an unchanging and perfect heaven, but also provided empirical evidence against geocentric and geoheliocentric systems. His dispute with Christopher Scheiner over the nature and interpretation of sunspots reflected the scientific debates of the period, showing the shift from philosophical reasoning to empirical evidence in understanding not just celestial phenomena, but science in general. Furthermore, his detailed observations of the Milky Way galaxy, which resolved into countless individual stars, overturned the belief in its nebulous nature and suggested a more complex structure of the universe. His observations of stars' apparent sizes and his methods for measuring them, despite being influenced by atmospheric distortion, represented significant advances in observational astronomy. These measurements also provided arguments against the Tychonic system, which basically suggested that stars would appear much larger if they were as distant as heliocentric models suggested. Just a side note, I don't admit to understand much about astronomy, so I'm doing my best to explain things the best way that I can. Perhaps my understanding of astronomy will be a little bit more enlightened by the end of this video, but that remains to be seen. Now, Galileo's conflict with Father Orazio Grassi regarding the nature of comets spiraled into a broader debate about scientific methods and the principles underlying celestial phenomena in general. Galileo's engagement in this debate through publications such as The Assayer highlights his role not only as a scientist, but as a critical philosopher of science, who emphasized empirical evidence and rational argumentation over established authority, or simply speculative reason. He wasn't just doing science, but he was changing how science was done. Well, the dispute began with Grassi's assertion in 1618 that comets were celestial bodies following predictable paths, which contradicted the Aristotelian belief that comets were atmospheric phenomena. In comes Galileo to challenge Grassi's conclusions, initially via a proxy publication by Mario Guiducci, where he critiqued Grassi's methods and findings without offering a definitive explanation of his own, reflecting the uncertain state of comet science at the time. Galileo's critique escalated in the Assayer, published in 1623, where he argued that science should be a pursuit of observable truths and verifiable hypotheses. Sounds pretty fair, doesn't it? This work is often seen as his kind of a scientific manifesto, because it articulates his views on precisely how science should be practiced, emphasizing observation, mathematical description, and crucially, the independence of scientific discovery from philosophical or religious dogma. And I'm sure you can see how that became a problem for some people to deal with. In the Assayer, Galileo famously stated that mathematics is the language in which the universe is written, arguing that understanding the universe requires reading this language through scientific investigation. This represents a pivotal moment in the development of what we now consider the scientific method, moving away from reliance on Aristotelian philosophy and towards a more empirical approach that values observation and mathematical rigor. Believe me, it's much better that way. Well, Galileo's dispute with Grassi and his defense of his methodological approaches in the Assayer didn't just mark a significant development in the philosophy of science, but it was also playing a key role in the eventual acceptance of heliocentrism. By arguing that physical evidence gathered through observation should guide scientific understanding, Galileo set the stage for modern physics and astronomy. However, these controversies also sowed the seeds with a rather more powerful entity, that being the Roman Catholic Church, who were a little bit upset with Galileo. You see, while Galileo's ideas found favor with some, including Pope Urban VIII, they also alienated others, particularly among the Jesuit sect, who felt that Galileo's dismissive attitude towards traditional philosophical approaches undermined their own blend of science and philosophy. This alienation would contribute to the hostile environment that eventually led to Galileo's trial and condemnation in 1633 for defending the heliocentric model, which of course was seen as contrary to Scripture, based on the prevailing interpretations at the time. And I do say interpretations, because not everybody was on the same page. In fact, just like in our modern day, after Martin Luther's time at least, where everybody is allowed to read the Bible and we don't have heresy trials anymore, everybody holds different views on different things, and sometimes the views they held are either rigid views or somewhat flexible ones, especially regarding the Trinity. But that's for a different video, isn't it? Back to Galileo. In 1616, the Roman Inquisition officially condemned heliocentrism, citing it as being foolish and absurd in philosophy, and formally heretical since it explicitly contradicts in many places the sense of Holy Scripture. This decree was a significant blow to Galileo, who had been advocating for the Copernican system based on his astronomical observations. But what about this condemnation of heliocentrism? Well, it wasn't just based on theological grounds, but also it incorporated physical and mathematical arguments, largely derived from Tycho Brahe's geocentric model. Brahe's model cleverly amalgamated traditional biblical interpretations with new astronomical observations, without necessitating the Earth's motion. His primary argument against heliocentrism was the absence of observable stellar parallax, which he claimed would be evident if the Earth orbited the Sun. From a technical perspective, Brahe argued that if the stars were distant enough to make their parallax unobservable with the naked eye, then they would have to be unimaginably large to appear as bright as they do in the night sky, larger even than the Sun, which seemed absurd at the time. Well, Galileo's defense of heliocentrism extended beyond mere scientific assertion. He attempted to reconcile the system with Scripture by proposing that the Bible was not meant to serve as a scientific authority, but rather as a guide to spiritual salvation. Good luck with that. He articulated these views in his letter to the Grand Duchess Christina and in various other correspondences, arguing that scriptural texts were often written metaphorically and should not be taken as literal scientific explanations. Well, you can imagine how people took this. This position placed Galileo very much at odds with the Church's traditional view that Scripture was the ultimate authority on all matters, and that, of course, includes the natural world. The situation escalated with the publication of Galileo's dialogue concerning the two chief world systems in 1632, which ostensibly compared the Copernican system with the Ptolemaic, but was seen as openly favoring heliocentrism. Despite having received approval from the Roman censor, the dialogue led to Galileo being summoned to Rome by the Inquisition in 1633. You can imagine how that felt, sort of hearing your name announced over the school intercom. ASMR historian to the principal's office, in a very angry voice. This can't be good news. Now, the trial that followed resulted in Galileo being found, and this was the wording of the charge, vehemently suspect of heresy. Of course, he was then forced to recant his support for heliocentrism. And contrary to what a lot of people think, the Inquisition didn't just grab him and hand him over to secular authorities to burn him at the stake. No, he was just put under house arrest, which I understand is not good, but a lot of people tend to think that he was executed for heliocentric beliefs. This is simply not the case. Well, a little bit more about the trial. His trial and condemnation seem to highlight this critical period in the history of science, where observational science began to challenge more deeply the philosophical and theological underpinnings of the society at whole. Therefore, this conflict with the Church wasn't just about the placement of the Earth in the cosmos, but effectively it was about who held the authority to interpret reality, who decides what is real and what isn't, religion or science. We can have a bit of both, can't we? Well, perhaps they shouldn't step on each other's toes. I think they both have a place, regardless of your beliefs, as long as we all take them and have a look at what each one has to offer. Anyway, Galileo's trial by the Roman Inquisition in 1633 is one of the most famous episodes in the history of science. It culminated after a series of events that began with Galileo's advocacy for the Copernican system, which suggested that the Earth and other planets orbit the Sun. And it was controversial because it contradicted this geocentric model, and the Catholic Church were definitely in support of that, matching it up with their scripture and basing it in the Aristotelian cosmology. Well, almost everyone. Pope Urban VIII, who had been an admirer and even a supporter of Galileo, asked him to write a book discussing the Copernican system and the traditional geocentric system, but he would prefer if he was to treat them as purely hypothetical. You see, the Pope didn't want to step on any toes either, and perhaps he was trying to give Galileo a little bit of a hushed warning. Well, in 1632, he published that work, the aforementioned Concerning Two Chief World Systems, which ostensibly presented the arguments for both sides, but, as we know, it was considered to be advocating heliocentrism through the character of Salviati, who effectively argued for Copernicanism. While the reaction to the dialogue was swift and severe, Galileo was summoned to Rome by the Inquisition. Despite his old age and health, well, he was deteriorating a little bit at this time. He faced a rather hostile tribunal that was reluctant to accept his claims that the book was written in a purely hypothetical context. It's just a prank, bro. The Inquisition found that Galileo's writings made him a heretic, and that is just too bad. Well, after being forced to recant his views under the threat of torture, he was placed under house arrest. His dialogue was then banned, and further publications of all of his work were simply prohibited. Don't talk about Galileo anymore. The sentence, while it was harsh, indeed spared him from more severe physical punishment, reflecting his previously high standing with the church officials, but also because he was rather an old man at this point, and it just would not have looked good. The legend that Galileo muttered the words, "and yet it moves," after his recantation epitomizes the view that personal conviction cannot be silenced by authority. And it's a nice little story, but it's a story that appeared only a century after his death, and is considered apocryphal. Once again, sorry to ruin your fun. Now, despite his condemnation, Galileo continued his scientific work. Of course, when you're stuck in the house all day, you have to do something, and something was what he did. Under house arrest, he wrote 2 new sciences, which laid the foundations for modern kinematics and materials science. His work had a profound impact on the later science, too. Albert Einstein even praised his contributions to physics, and Galileo is often heralded as the father of modern physics, something that Albert Einstein certainly seemed to agree with, and If you've got Einstein on your side, well, can't be all that bad. Of course, the trial itself also had long-term implications for the relationship between science and religion. It became kind of a symbol of the conflict between free inquiry and religious orthodoxy. This affair reflects the broader themes of an intellectual authority and the freedom to explore and validate new ideas, even if they go against traditional beliefs. And don't get too ahead of yourself, because this is a conflict that continues in various forms to this very day. Well, Galileo's death on January the 8th, 1642, certainly marked the end of an era, not only for science, but also for his chaotic relationship with the Catholic Church. Despite his contributions to the scientific community, his condemnation for heresy profoundly influenced the circumstances surrounding his burial. Initially, there were indeed grand plans for Galileo's final resting place, reflecting the status he had. Ferdinando II, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, intended for Galileo to be buried in the main body of the Basilica of Santa Croce in Florence, right next to his ancestors. This was also to be accompanied by the erecting of a lavish marble mausoleum, a testament to his legacy. However, was there somebody you forgot to ask? The plans were swiftly curtailed by the objections from Pope Urban VIII and his nephew, Cardinal Francesco Barberini, highlighting the lasting impact of Galileo's conflict with the Church. Of course, they couldn't have a heretic with such a great monument, right? Instead of the prestigious burial that was initially planned, Galileo was interred in a much more modest location, a small little room next to the novices' chapel, at the end of the corridor from the southern transept of the basilica to the sacristy. This was a stark contrast to the recognition he had hoped to receive from posterity, and reflected the Church's continued disapproval after his death. In comparison, it's basically like throwing him in the broom closet. Not very nice at all. Now fast forwarding a little bit later, in 1737, almost a century after his death, his contributions to science were finally recognized in a manner that befitted his legacy. His remains were moved to the main body of the Basilica of Santa Croce, where a monument was erected in his honor. During this reburial, relics including 3 fingers and a tooth were removed from his remains, one of which is currently displayed at the Museo Galileo in Florence. This later ceremony did much to rectify the earlier understated burial, serving as a posthumous rehabilitation of his status as a pioneering scientist. After his death, the contentious issue surrounding his advocacy for heliocentrism gradually receded from the forefront of public discourse. The prohibition on reprinting Galileo's works, initially imposed by the Inquisition, was finally lifted in 1718, enabling the publication of his collected works, and I mean everything except the controversial dialogue. Well, in 1741, Pope Benedict XV sanctioned the publication of Galileo's complete scientific contributions, which included a modified version of the dialogue, and by modified I mean censored. A broad ban on heliocentric writings was somewhat eased in 1758, when the general prohibition was removed from the index of prohibited books, although the Dialogue and the De Revolutionibus of Copernicus remained specifically banned. It wasn't until 1838 that all official opposition to heliocentrism was eliminated from the index, reflecting a significant shift in the Church's stance towards the scientific concept. The narrative of the Galileo affair experienced a resurgence in interest during the early 19th century, particularly among Protestant polemicists who utilized the incident to critique Roman Catholicism. In 1939, Pope Pius XII, in one of his initial addresses to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, praised Galileo as a bold pioneer of scientific endeavor. His advisor, Professor Robert Lieber, noted that Pius XII was keen on maintaining an open dialogue with the scientific community, and expressed quite a bit of regret over the historical treatment of Galileo. The controversy was revisited in 1990 by Cardinal Ratzinger, later becoming Pope Benedict XVI, during a speech at Sapienza University of Rome. He referenced the philosophical views of Paul Feyerabend, who argued that the Church's condemnation of Galileo was justified based on the standards of rationality and justice prevalent at the time. Ratzinger highlighted the complexity of forming an apologetic based on the modern perceptions of these historical events. Significant progress in rectifying this historical wrong was made on October 31, 1992, when Pope John Paul II officially acknowledged the Church's error in condemning Galileo's heliocentric theory. This acknowledgement was part of a broader discourse recognizing the need to distinguish the Bible's scriptural authority and its interpretations. Galileo's legacy is extensive and varied. He's credited with the discovery of the 4 largest moons of Jupiter, collectively known as the Galilean moons, being Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Beyond these celestial discoveries, his name has been commemorated in various scientific contexts. The Galileo spacecraft, notable for being the first to orbit Jupiter, and the Galileo Global Satellite Navigation System, which provides GPS services worldwide. Both honor his contributions to science. Additionally, the Galilean transformation in classical mechanics, which describes the transformation between inertial systems, and the Gal unit, a non-SI unit of acceleration, are also named after him, reflecting his broad scope of his influence and his lasting legacy. Furthermore, Galileo's name graces celestial features, such as planet Galileo and asteroid 697 Galileo, ensuring his legacy continues to be celebrated within and beyond the scientific community. I suppose we can say that he reached for the stars, but he flew a little bit too close to the sun. Well, thank you very much for listening. Galileo Galilei, What a topic, and what a man. If you've enjoyed the content, then, I don't know, maybe you should like and subscribe to the channel. And before I go, I'd like to thank my top-tier Patreon subscribers. That's being Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, and Susan. Thank you very much for joining, Susan. 4 ultimate chads supporting the channel. Thank you very much, guys. Love you all. And thank you, dear listener, for joining me again. I'm sure I can count on seeing you next time. And until then, look after yourself and everybody around you, and good night.